Welcome again, everyone. This month's Cyber Meetup is going to be presented by Jason Hill, Director of Strategic Services at Cybriant. And go ahead and take it away, Jason. We look forward to it.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, as Elizabeth said, I am Jason Hill, Director of Strategic Services at Cybriant, as you read on the screen already. What we do is we are a cybersecurity company. We have everything ranging from managed endpoint detection and response, vulnerability patching, SIM, firewall, all of those managed, and we manage that for a lot of different companies, as well as what I do is assessments, gap analysis, advisements, professional services, that sort of thing. And so with that background and the fact that we have customers from anywhere from your mom and pop operations up to multinational organizations that span the globe, obviously, and have tens of thousands of users, we see a lot. And what we have come to see is that there are trends, and there's some fairly common reasons why customers come to us, and customers are needing help. And so what we're going to talk about today is what are those reasons and how can you protect yourself against what we see as the primary threat to our cybersecurity. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what is the state of cybersecurity? So if you're going to fight this battle, how are you going to fight it? Well, you've got to know what you're fighting. You've got to know what the state of cybersecurity is, what's myth, what's fact, and how do you counteract that? So first we'll start with what is the current state. Next we'll go to the small stuff. Now in cybersecurity, it really does matter to sweat the small stuff. A lot of people, the whole saying is, don't sweat the small stuff. No, you'd want to do it. It is important because it's the small stuff that we find is the biggest hindrance to having a secure infrastructure, to having fewer and far between in problems, because we have seen time and time again where it's the simple things that really trip people up. And we'll have some stories around that and things like that. So you get the simple stuff out of the way. You get the simple stuff dealt with. What next? So we've dealt with the things that are either free or don't cost all that much and you can do with a little bit of effort, but relatively simply. What's next? What do you need after you get the small stuff done? Well, we'll move on to being harder, better, faster. Finally, we'll follow up with becoming a Zen Master. So what we're talking about here is you've tackled the small stuff, you've gotten the things out of the way which trip up most people, and that honestly, when you are an attacker, you're looking for that simple stuff that's just easy. I mean, it's taking candy from a baby. So you've already got that. What's next? The harder, better, faster. We'll talk about that. You've got that. Okay, so you're sitting at this presentation thinking, okay, well, we've got everything. Oh, well, do you? That is where Zen Master comes into play. Are you a Zen Master, or how do you become a Zen Master? And we'll go over what it takes to really reach that very few companies that reach this level of sophistication, and we'll get into that. And then finally, we will have a Q&A at the end. So let's talk about the state of cybersecurity. Now, there's some common tropes around security. I know that when I started in security after being an administrator and architect, there was a lot of things that you just heard all the time. So of course that's the truth. One of those being, well, your users are really where you're going to get hit. They're going to be malicious. They're going to be not all that intelligent. They're going to do things that are going to cause you issues. Is that true? Not so much. Verizon found that 70% of breaches were external actors. Now, like Verizon, they have a wide breadth of customer base. They also have different services, not just security services. And so they also make very good reports. And so they found that 70% of breaches were external actors. That means 70% of what you're going to be dealing with, 70% of what you're going to have to be protecting from is outsiders. It is that hacker in his mom's basement that you have to worry about. Okay, actually, it's more cyber criminals, gangs, essentially, as well as nation states. And then you do have the occasional hacker in his mom's basement, such as the one that did Garmin, apparently in his mom's attic. So we have that to worry about. Now, there's also PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, if you're not familiar with them, they are one of the big four accounting firms. So anybody who's in accounting, your CFO, anybody like that, they're going to know who PricewaterhouseCoopers is. They deal with everything from money laundering to fraud, wire fraud, that sort of thing. So they cover the gambit, and what they have found is 34% of all fraud is cyber related. So just at an accounting standpoint, not even to do with IT, a full third of all of the breaches that they have found or fraud is cyber related. Here's a big one. University of Maryland found that there is an active attack every 39 seconds. Now, this is not somebody gets a phishing email. This is that there is either artificial intelligence, machine learning, something like that going on, or an actual person or group actively attacking. This is red teaming, essentially, happening every 39 seconds. And then, of course, ransomware. How can we talk about security without covering ransomware? It is prevalent. It is becoming bigger and bigger. In fact, that last one I like the best because it says in Q3 of 2019, $84,000 was the average. But the year before that, in Q3 2018, it was 40,000. So it literally doubled in a year, and that was last year, so I'm sure it's going to double again. This is a huge problem. As you can see from all of these fancy stats, cybersecurity is big. It is something that we are seeing more and more of in a variety of customers. Oftentimes people will say, well, I just do X, Y, Z. So for example, we had a customer who produces, I won't name the specific thing that they do, but they make a very popular flavoring condiment. And they said, well, what do people want to steal from us? I mean, all we have is recipes. Well, one, you have recipes, and unless you have no competitors, that's something. Also, you have 150 employees. Each one of those people have social security numbers, have bank accounts, have credit scores, have credit cards. And if you compromise an account and can get one of those or something, well, I mean, that's, you can buy a social security number for about $50 or so. Well, that's $50. It's worth it my time spending 30 minutes coming up with a phishing campaign if I get a $50 social security number. So yes, everyone has something that is valuable to a criminal. So now that we've established that yes, cybersecurity is a big deal and it is something that we have to deal with, how do we get there? How do we deal with the things that are happening in the world today? Sweat the small stuff. Training. This is one of those things that everybody has training, especially if you are cybersecurity related. Not cybersecurity. If you're under compliance frameworks, if you have HIPAA or PCI or NIST or any of the compliances to meet, you do training. But the way companies do training is generally not that great. In fact, 67% of breaches could have been addressed by better training. So you have breaches that occur because people just don't know how to react to what they're seeing. I have a great example of this. Just the other day, we were talking to a client who called us in a bit of a panic because what they found out was that they had a customer who was in accounting, of all places, of course they were, where they had been receiving random notifications on their phone. Okay, why is that a big deal? So what had been happening was you had that company had multi-factor authentication. They were trying to do it right. Office 365, changing the passwords often, and multi-factor authentication. Well, the user had been receiving prompts on her phone to approve a login while she was at home, while she was on vacation, while she was at the park with her kids. And of course, she thought, why not? I must be logging in, I guess. I'm playing with my kids in the park. I'm logging in. Why not click OK on that? What was happening was that someone had compromised her account because she had used passwords in multiple places, same password. And they were logging into her corporate account. It was doing the thing it was supposed to do, the multi-factor authentication, and she was just clicking OK. Because, well, I click it all the time anyway. I'm just going to click it and move on. Training could have helped with that, I think. That's a pretty extreme case, though. So what we found is that the best way to start with this is train users to notice the weird things. And we put it just like that. Notice weird things. Because if you start to do, techno babble of talking about phishing and look at the email headers and make sure, nobody's going to do that who's not in IT. What you want to do is you want to draw their attention to anything that stands out, anything that is not normal, anything that's weird. A lot of times when we have reports of phishing or when we have people who send us things, it'll be something simple like, well, this person normally doesn't speak this way, or I don't have an account at this location, and I don't have a Gmail account. So why am I getting a login to Gmail? Those sorts of things are weird. That can extend to physical as well. Why is a door open? That shouldn't be open. Why is there employee records on somebody's desk and they're not at their desk? That's weird. That's not right. We need to notice that sort of thing. Training does not have to be pricey. Now, I have a story that wraps all of what I'm talking about together, and I'll get to that. But it doesn't. You can come up with very clever ways of making training engaging. And we'll talk about that when I go through my story. And most importantly, honestly, this is the most important thing that we have to worry about. Regularity is more important than comprehensiveness. And one mistake that we make in the cybersecurity space is we want to try to shove every concept into a user's head once a year. That, as we can see here, just doesn't work. It's not effective. How many times have you gone to security training and there is an hour or two of things that you have to learn, answer questions on, and not 6 or 9 months later, but 6 or 9 minutes later, you don't remember half of it? Well, that's because it's once a year and it's more concerned about comprehension. Okay, so let's talk about this story. Now, like I said, we do assessments. And part of our assessments, we do a little weird. We don't come in with spreadsheets or anything like that. Well, all of our assessors have backgrounds in system administration, multiple different areas, things like that, system architecture. So we just have conversations with people. And we were doing this at a company, and it was astonishing. Every single user knew exactly what phishing was, how to identify it, what tailgating was, and why it's bad. They mentioned clean desk policy and just on and on and on about all these things about cybersecurity, and we were completely amazed. Went to the CISO and said, how are you doing this? We have all these programs that everybody across the world is trying to implement to try to get training better, and you are achieving, retention that's just amazing. And she smiled and said, well, it's not that hard. What you do is you have a bounty. You have this bounty where you say, if anybody notices something weird, something out of place, send it to us. Send a picture, send a screenshot, or just tell us about it and we'll come gather the evidence. And if it is actually something bad, then what we do is we congratulate the person across the company. We then point out why this is a good find. We point out in the email, here's what really is not right about this email, or this is a picture of somebody tailgating somebody, and that's certainly not allowed here, and things like that. And then finally, the training doesn't have to be pricey. We reward them with a candy bar. And he said, you give candy to people and suddenly they're very motivated to find what you want them to find. It's the little things. That is regular. It's just pointing out things that aren't quite right. And it's not very costly. A box of candy bars, and you suddenly have people willing and eager to find things wrong with your environment. It's a really good way of training. So we have training. Great. What else? Patching. I cannot tell you how often out-of-date software is the method by which customers suddenly decide they need our service. A great example is WannaCry. WannaCry, pretty much everybody who has touched a computer has probably heard of WannaCry, and yet we are still finding systems that are vulnerable. Because yes, they've heard about it, but they either don't receive the emails, they don't know that they need to update. I have no real idea why, but it happens. Patching isn't done, and so WannaCry is still out there. It's still going. It's still receiving money from people. We also have end of life. Now, end of life is very dangerous. This is because even if you have something that is end of life, you find out that it is highly vulnerable to a very bad 0-day or something similar. Generally speaking, you can't just rip and replace the day you find out. You have to plan, you have to budget, you have to purchase, you have to implement, then you can pull the system out. That gives days for hackers to then come up with exploits, to then start practicing and start going out with those exploits and things like that. So it is very dangerous, and there's some great examples of that. So right now, as we speak, D-Link found out that most of their router ranges were leaking the secret key. Well, this includes end of life, and D-Link basically said there's going to be thousands upon thousands of home users and small companies that are going to be attacked, and they are going to be leaking their secret key because we're not going to do updates. And even if we did, that user base normally doesn't update. So that's going to happen. Another great example is Windows XP. So we all know Windows XP is end of life. We all know Windows XP is dangerous. There's a problem though. And this is something that I really want to point out because it's something that a lot of people overlook. And that is, yes, Windows XP is out of date. There is virtually no company that's still using Windows XP, so they think. Yes, as a desktop, they're not using it. However, Windows XP Embedded was a very popular operating system for point-of-sale systems and, scary enough, health monitoring systems. So the thing beside your bed that monitors your EKG and your oxygen levels and things like that, odds are pretty good that's running Windows XP. Now, they've started moving off to a different operating system on that, but those are fairly common, and it's not being patched. And there's exploits out there now that gives administrative privileges to them. So it literally can be a case of life and death in that case. I like to include the administrators and the technical staff training here in patching. we're like that. One thing that is changing, but it really needs to be driven into the minds of everybody involved with this, is that humans, all humans that touch a computer, are part of the security apparatus for your system. If you are an administrator, you are definitely part of the cybersecurity ecosystem for your company. It may not seem like it. You may say, well, you know what? All I do is make sure that the website's up and running. I don't really understand why I'm doing that. That's security. Security does that. Yes, but as we will discover in the next slide, there are absolutely things that you can start to be focusing on that will advance the cause of security. This could be role specific. So again, you're an administrator, or you're a network administrator, you're a developer, something like that. There are pieces about what you do that are absolutely security related and can really change whether or not your company is going to be a target just on what you do alone. Who cares about if there is a security department? You are part of that as well. And so that needs to be trained. That needs to be put into the mindset. The last small stuff is configuration. We are noticing an increase, just like Verizon, of exploits and attacks that are being propagated against misconfiguration. So this could be something like default settings. And here's a great quote I love: default configs are never good. I love that guy. So it's not good to have default configs. And you may say, well, there's no known vulnerabilities for the system I'm using, and then I'll just install the server and move on. There's several problems with that. One is that you're talking about having issues where, a great example is this: if you log into a system, if you're an adversary and you start perusing and probing an IP and you see a default IIS splash screen, you know several things. You know what operating system they're using. You know that they have default configs, which means they probably have default configs on everything. They probably haven't changed default passwords on things that have default passwords. And so you already have a treasure trove of information just from that splash screen. So it is important to keep things moving and to keep things going. Part of this is, at a minimum, change default passwords. Change your default passwords. Now, this is a requirement in several compliances, but it's also very, very important to do in general. Default passwords are default. Everyone knows them. You can quite literally Google what the passwords are to systems. I cannot tell you how many lobbies I've been in. I've connected to the guest Wi-Fi, maybe done a few other things, and then find the camera system. And guess what? Camera systems almost always have default passwords. I then log into the camera systems, and now I can see the layout. I can see who's where. I can say who is in the office and who's not in the office. That's great when we do social engineering, where you call and say, hey, I know Bob's not in the office anymore, or he's not in there today, and I really need a paper from him. Can you go over and get it from his desk? Something like that, right? There's ways that you can compound these issues. Shut down used ports and turn off used services. Now, this may seem like a little bit of overkill. Why do I need to turn off unused ports and unused services? The primary reason is because, one, you want to reduce your attack surface, and two, just because there's not a vulnerability in the service now doesn't mean that some update's going to come along that introduces a vulnerability later, or that a 0 day is going to be found and everyone's going to know about a vulnerability that's there. So it is important that on the servers that you have and on the systems that you have that are single use or have minimal transactions, minimal utilization, you lock that down. You don't have to go so far as to getting the CIS controls and things like that, or if you want to go military, the STIGs. You don't have to go that far, but at least turn off what you're not using and ensure that a firewall is made. That goes back to understanding what is needed. This is a huge thing. All too often we see where people are attacked from a vector that they did not even know they had. I cannot tell you how many times we've done vulnerability scans and we've done assessments, and we have found that there's a server there that you never knew about and it's vulnerable and you used it, right? That sort of thing. So that comes down to know your environment. Know what every system does, why it does it, who's responsible for it, and how it is supposed to be managed and secured. That is a very important aspect of configuration. So that is the small stuff. That's the stuff that doesn't really cost much other than man hours and things like that. Now, what can we do beyond that? What can we do if we've properly set up our patching, if we've started training our users, if we've configured every server perfectly? What do we do next? Well, doing all the things that we just talked about is going to help improve your security. But you still need to know what's going on, and you still need to provide protection, because no matter what you do, users are users, and they're going to do things that are going to introduce problems. So the first thing that we need to ask is, are we still doing updates on signatures? Let me explain. Signature-based technology and endpoints and SIMs, which are log aggregation, the security incident and event management systems, firewall IDSs, that sort of thing. A lot of them still use signatures. Now, what a signature is you have an attack that nobody's seen before. You have a phish, whatever it happens to be. You capture information from that. You send it to the vendor. The vendor then creates a signature, basically a fingerprint that says, this is what to look for in order to capture that particular problem, that particular exploit, that particular vulnerability, that particular attack. And then, on a hopefully regular basis, they then compile all the signatures created together and send that down as an update. Well, there's two giant problems with that. From January through April, 3.7 new malware samples per second. Do you think they're keeping up? No, they are not. If you have signature-based technology, that's better than nothing. I'd rather have a bow and arrow against a machine gun than my hand, but still, I'd rather have another machine gun or something like that, right? So you really are doing a disservice to yourself if you still have anything that's done through signatures, because the turnaround on that is awful. And as we'll see through some other statistics here, there's no way that signature-based technologies can keep up with what's happening. So let's talk about what we need to look for in the different things that we need to have in place. One of those is endpoint protection. So what do we need to look for at endpoint protection? Antivirus just isn't cutting it anymore. Standard antivirus is just not doing what it needs to do, because most standard antivirus is signature-based. And as we see here, signature-based, that's just not going to work anymore. What you need to look for is it is dynamic. What I mean by that is that it is able to dynamically assess whether malicious software is malicious. Now, there's multiple reasons for that. One, the speed of which malware samples are created, but also this stat right here. So 2 years ago, technology's gotten better since then. 2 years ago, 94% of malware was polymorphic. What does that mean? Polymorphic is that the malware was able to transform itself, rewrite its code, basically, when it encountered security measures. So we have ourselves, you know, those I forget what they're called, but the little squiggly things on the matrix. You basically have that now with malware, where we have malware that's able to divert and say, oh, I see that it's this brand of antivirus, and I know that this brand of antivirus deals with my kind of malware in this way, so I'm going to change myself so I don't look like that anymore. So you need some kind of endpoint protection that is going to basically sandbox the software before it runs. You want it to be able to deconstruct the malware and say, what are you going to do? What are you going to ask for? You know, if you have a Minesweeper game and it says, hey, I'm about to run, and by the way, I need access to the system space and memory, that's probably not a good thing. You probably don't want to have that happen. And so you need endpoint protection that's going to detect that and dynamically stop it no matter what is being presented to it. Ransomware is a huge problem, as we saw. Everybody has either heard of someone getting popped by ransomware or they themselves have been hit by ransomware. And it's probably a good statistic that whatever city you're living in probably has been hit by ransomware. Well, no technology is perfect. So is there the ability to roll that back? Can you take the endpoint that's been compromised by ransomware that got through somehow, that was not properly sandboxed, and roll that back to previous state, to where the system becomes unencrypted, basically? Yes, that is actually a thing. Yes, it is possible. We have demos on that for the endpoint protection that we utilize, and called Sentinel-1, but it is something that is possible, and it is highly, highly recommended. Because again, ransomware is not one of those things where you say, oh, okay, we have ransomware, let's do what we can to get it out. No, you have ransomware, and now you have it. SIM technology, security incident and event management. Now, this is really a cut and paste of what we're looking for endpoint protection. Is it dynamic? Meaning, is it able to interpret the logs coming from your environment? Is it able to interpret the net flows in your environment, the network traffic that it sees? And is it able to put all that together into a picture of what normal looks like, so that when something abnormal happens, it alerts you to that? Not only that, but is it able to then adapt as your company changes? This is something that is not all that common in the marketplace. Most SIMs are still signature-based. To be blunt, that is not good enough. You need something that's based on AI, something that's based on machine learning, something that's able to identify patterns automatically and adapt to that. Just to remind you, one attack every 39 seconds. Probably need to know what's going on in your network. By the way, I'll just throw this one up too. By the way, log management is not a SIM. Let me say that again. Log management is not a SIM. There are some big names out there. Splunk, for example. Logarithm, for example. That started life being log management. Splunk is amazing at log management, the Google of log management. We were part of something with the government that I can't tell you about, but we were part of something that tested Splunk in a SIM environment. And what we found was it's lacking. Yes, they have the SIM module, and yes, they're a well-funded company that is very good at log management, but a SIM they are not. Same thing with a lot of the others. So if you have log management, like let's say PTRG or something like that, that's great. You do need that, and it is important, but it is not a SIM. It is not designed to identify security incidents and inform you of that. You can kind of beat it with a hammer and make it do it, but it's not designed to do that, and you need that in today's age. So we have become harder, better, faster. How do we become harder or better or faster? How does that happen? We want to create a security program. So we've installed the SIM. We have installed endpoint protection that is able to dynamically adjust to the information that we're getting across the wire and new log sources and all that sort of stuff. We have trained our users. We've done everything. We need a security program to help guide that. Because no matter what you do, unless you have some kind of framework, unless you have something to build upon, you're going to miss something. And a security program helps you get there. It helps you fill in all the blanks that you may have forgotten about. We personally like NIST, moving to CMMC because we do some government contracts. We have clients that have government contracts. But really any ISO or COBIT, any of the frameworks are going to work for a security program. What that's going to allow you to do is to then monitor and assess your progress. So this is actually something that even the best sometimes fall down on. What you have is all the greatest tools. You have all of the patching up to date. You have your users are trained daily. You have all your configurations buttoned up to a T. But you've done that and you say, great, we're secure. We'll look at it again next year. No, that's not going to work because this is an ever-changing dynamic landscape. You have to monitor, you have to assess progress. Part of the monitoring can be the SIM, the endpoint protection, having a third party manage that for you. Part of monitoring is the tools that you have, but you also have to monitor that the tools are working. Is this still the best tool? Does dynamic sandboxing still work? One day it won't. But that's just a matter of fact. One day, the tools that we use today that are cutting edge, that are the latest and greatest, they are going to be old news. We need to keep up with that. We need to be part of subscriptions that tell us that there's an exploit that needs to be addressed, that there's a 0 day here, or that our vendor has an update that addresses a security flaw. We need to constantly have data flowing to us personally as well as to our environment to make sure that we are staying on top of it. And a security program helps manage that. It helps put it together. Now, the last thing, as part of our more technical, before we get to becoming a Zen Master, is mobile threat detection. Now, this is actually an interesting story. We knew about mobile. We kind of had that on our radar. It was something that we knew we needed to pay attention to, but we really hadn't done much of an engagement on it yet. And we were approached by a large multinational financial company about doing a mobile threat assessment. What we found was startling. Essentially, what most people believe, and they believed it just like everybody else, is that MDM is enough. Mobile device management, Intune, Zen Mobile, that sort of thing. Because, well, they sell it. Microsoft and Citrix, they sell those as being enough. Well, you can put all of your data into a container that's encrypted and no other software is going to get it. And we can make sure that you can remove that information if the person leaves the company, even if it's their own phone and so on. So it sounds like, yeah, that's absolutely something that is going to provide value. It's absolutely something that is going to be useful and cover our mobile devices. Not so much. MDM is not going to analyze app behavior. It's not going to tell you that an application is, like I said before, application is accessing system memory. It's not going to tell you that an application is asking for your location data, even though you don't have any reason for that app to have that. A great example that we found was that There was an app, a game that was malicious. And this is actually, I think it's part of Homeland Security's analysis of mobile threats. And what they found was that this game was where, depending on where you tapped on the screen and your hand moved, you would, play the game. Basically, it needed the accelerometer, right? So where you rotate the phone and things like that. However, what the app was doing behind the scenes was it was tracking every time the user put in their PIN. Think about it. When you hit a particular number on your phone moves in a unique way for each number. So by using the accelerometer and by running in the background all the time, this app was able to detect what the PIN was for the phone. And then once it had that, it was able to then grant itself privileges. Really clever. That is not something mobile device management is going to be able to do. Also, is it going to do network attacks or device-based attacks? A perfect example of network attack is, have you ever heard of a stinger device? A stinger device is something that, quite frankly, most police departments and FBI departments have. And this is where it is a man in the middle. They go to a location where they think some kind of illegal activity is occurring. They set up a fake cell tower. The criminals then connect to the cell tower that they think is a real one, but it's actually the police. The police is able to then wiretap that conversation, also everybody else in the area, and there you go. Mobile device management isn't going to detect that. And if the police have that tool, you can almost certainly be guaranteed that the bad guys have that too. Identify suspicious activity. This is based on user modeling, user activity. Not going to happen in mobile device. And then block phishing in real time, meaning that you get an email on your phone and most people click on it. Because think about it. You are using your phone because you're not at your computer, which means you are doing something other than working probably. And you then have your attention diverted. So you're at a baseball game or you're watching TV or you're doing something like that. Well, you're kind of paying attention to what you're doing and you're looking at your email. Oh, here's something. I didn't know I ordered 7 pounds of gold. Yeah, certainly, I'll accept that. And you keep watching what you're doing. So that is becoming a really big attack vector as well. Mobile device management isn't going to do that. So let's say that we've done all that. How do we then make sure that what we've done is the best, and how do we then advance to the point to where we have really the best resources that we can have, and we are constantly assessing that? Vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is going to verify what you've done. Have you configured the server correctly? Are you updating properly? We just literally finished an assessment with a client where when we interviewed them and asked about patching, they said, oh yeah, patching's handled by our MSP. They do a great job. I don't even have to worry about it. It just happens. Okay, great. We did vulnerability scanning, and their accounting server was Swiss cheese. It was absolutely riddled with holes and exposed to the internet. Okay, well, you might want to have a conversation with your MSP. That's part of keeping up. Now notice that penetration testing is way back here on the back end of after you've done everything, after you have successfully buttoned up everything else. This is something that a lot of people get kind of mixed up on is, oh, well, we want to be better at security, so let's buy let's hire a penetration testing firm and go in there and hack us to, see everything that needs to happen. That's not exactly how penetration testing works. The analogy I like to use is penetration testing is a lot like hiring a burglar, to break into your house. Now, if you have the latest and greatest tools, you have a solid steel door with bolts that are as thick as your arm, and you have attack dogs on every floor. Yeah, hiring a burglar to see how well your security is constructed is a good idea, because you have done everything you can to prepare, and you need to see if there's something missing. What a lot of people do is they hire and they get penetration testing at the beginning of their security adventure before they've really done anything else. That's like hiring a burglar to rob your house when the front door is left open. What they're going to do is they're going to take your money, write a report that says, the front door is open, and so I took everything you owned. Well, yeah, because the front door was open. So what you need to do is you need to address all of this other stuff. You need to get to the point to where you say, I think we're in a pretty good location. I think that we've covered everything that we can cover, and we need to bring an expert in to identify anything that hasn't been covered, anything that we've missed. That's what penetration testing really should be used for, is what have we missed? Because you should have gone through the entire, basically the entire slide deck that we just presented, made sure that you have everything, and then you do a penetration test. That's where the value of a penetration test really comes into its own. So often we'll get asked about penetration testing, and we'll quite frankly tell them, no, you probably don't need one. You probably need to do all this other stuff. And we can certainly help you with that, but you really need to do this other stuff. A security assessment. Now, I've alluded to security assessments several times in this talk. I've said several things about things that we found on security assessment, but the best story I have, and part of the reason why you definitely want a security assessment, even if you've done all that you can do to secure your environment, is I performed a security assessment on a law firm, a fairly large law firm that had clients that you have absolutely heard of. Corporate clients that are household names. Everybody in the country knows them. And their security department, because of that, was, pretty good. They had things buttoned up. They had the latest, greatest on endpoint protection. They had the SIM running. They had constant vulnerability scans. They were doing social engineering. They were creating their own phishing campaign, customizing it for their clients, knowing the internal. Their customer or their employees were trained. They had all sorts of security controls. Really good job. And as far as their security program is concerned, as far as their vulnerability scanning was concerned, as far as their penetration testing was concerned, they were as close to as perfect as you could get. So we come in and we do a security assessment. Now again, we don't do security assessments the way that most people do. We don't sit down with the laptop, open up and say, okay, my spreadsheet says to ask you this. If you don't answer in the way that my spreadsheet says to answer, then I'm going to have to mark you down as a fail because I don't understand what you're saying. No, we actually talk. Well, we got to the database administrator. And this is the database that holds all of the legal notes for all of the lawyers in this law firm. So it's a fairly important database. This is all the confidential, privilege, client attorney privilege data. Not even the database administrator should be looking at this stuff, right? So I just start talking to him and say, okay, well, with all these security controls, it must be hard to work with your vendor on addressing some of these database issues that you've been talking about. So what do you do? What kind of process do you use to allow a vendor in? Now, we knew that what the policy was. We knew what he should have been doing, and I was simply trying to verify that is what he did. And he said, well, yeah, you're right. It is really cumbersome. So what I've done is they haven't locked down the USB ports on servers. They've done it on workstations, but not servers. So I just take and hook up a USB drive, download the database to my hard drive, and take it home so that the vendor can work on it there. Unencrypted, both the database and the drive, with lawyer's notes for very, very, very powerful corporations. That was an interesting find. They said that alone paid for the security assessment by itself, because nothing they were doing had identified that as a threat. But we came in as a security assessment, and we're asking questions and just probing where they hadn't probed. So penetration testing is important, security assessment is important. But all of this is things that we have to do. Lastly, if you're really wanting to turn up, the security amp to 11, what you want to do, if you have a development team, is do real-time development vulnerability assessment. And what I mean by this is that you have software that's installed on the developer machines that as they submit code to a repository, it in real time analyzes that segment of code that they literally just committed for vulnerabilities. The way this normally works is you submit code, it goes through review, it's compiled or it's put into the staging system, the dev testing goes through QA, goes into staging, and then it's tested for security. If there's issues, it has to go all the way back and you have to start again. To really make things work the way it should, you really want to have real time. And so hopefully what we have had is all the way from the very simple stuff that is absolutely going to provide value to your security posture, to the middle ground that really everybody needs to really consider doing, because endpoint protection, SIM, that sort of thing is highly, highly valuable, all the way to the really esoteric security stuff that not many people are doing, but it is absolutely valuable. And so I hope you got something out of this. I hope that it's been valuable to you. And so I will open it up for questions if there are any.
Hey, Jason, this is Mike with TechGuard. Great presentation. Well done. I do have a question for you, if I could. Obviously organizations, depending on where they're at, just as an organization as a whole, like there might be some limited budgets and things like that they have to fight for internally to get done. So I know you kind of went through like natural progression of what an organization should do, but if there is limited funding, let's just say, what's the first one main thing? Like, where should they start? What would be your opinion on what would be the first thing you would do?
So, the way that we kind of constructed this was, let's start with the things that you could do for free, basically, just man hours. Train, patch, and work on your configurations, right? That's basic stuff. Patching is more important than anyone realizes. We see so many exploits, so many customers coming to us because they didn't patch and now they have data loss or something like that. So doing those can be very, very cheap, other than just man hours, and can really advance you. What the security game is. One thing that we like to say is that if a security vendor comes to you and say that they can make you secure, period, run away, because no one can make you secure. We can make you more secure. And quite frankly, it's the old joke of, the two guys are walking along in a path, and one, there's a bear, one bends down to tie his shoes, the other one takes off running and says, "Why are you tying your shoes?" "Well, all I need to do is outrun you." That's true in security. All you need to do is be less attractive as a target as somebody else, and you've already advanced yourself. So doing things like that are absolutely going to give you value. And then from that point, kind of what we tell people is this: if you have one thing you can spend money on, and there's only one thing that you can buy from a security standpoint, endpoint protection is it. Yes, you need the other stuff, but if budget is tight and you can only do one thing, buy endpoint protection, because that is by and large where you're going to get data loss, you're going to get exploits, you're going to get phishing clicked on, all sorts of things like that. So that's where I would go from that. And then really follow the yellow brick road of our presentation here, of what you need. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Hi, this is Charles Forsyth. You mentioned real-time software scanning, and I don't think I caught a product. Do you have a product recommendation or kind of product we could to look at?
So are you talking about the real-time development scanning, or where the endpoint protection sandboxes things in real time?
No, I meant the development when developers check code in.
Yeah, so we use contrast security. We've done, one thing that we do is we spend quite a bit of time vetting it ourselves. And one thing we really like about what they do is they have a complete suite of tools, all the way that you can put it onto your servers and you don't have to worry about your development, and it will catch and identify threats real time based on the code, and it will tell you the segment of code that is wrong, that is vulnerable, and you just fix that code, all the way back to they have an agent that's installed on the developer machines, and when the developer commits code, it analyzes that real time, and so it looks at, does this code meet best practices, and does it expose, based on our knowledge of all the other code in the environment, does it match, or does it expose any kind of vulnerability based on what's been submitted? And what it does is it prompts the developer right then and says, oh, by the way, there's a vulnerability that we found on this line of code. You might want to change it to, and then it gives us a few examples of what it needs to be changed to. It is very slick. But that's contrast security, and yeah, we work with them, so we'll certainly be more than happy to set you up a conversation about that.
Well, since nobody's jumping up, I also wanted to thank you for your comments on Splunk. I've been fighting that battle too, and it's nice to know I'm not alone.
You are not. You are not a man on an island. Like I said, I can't talk too much about what we're doing because you don't want to make the DoD mad. I'll just say that it was a very comprehensive program to assess different SIM technologies, and Splunk just fell flat on its face. It just couldn't do what was being asked of it, and so that was surprising, right? Because Splunk's a huge company, it's well funded, and it just wasn't able to keep up. So yeah, you're not alone on that one.
Well, does anybody else have anything? Any questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for the presentation. Hopefully we can have you back pretty soon for another round.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
And if nobody has anything else for us, we can go ahead and call it a night. Thank you everyone for joining and seeing the virtual cyber meetup. We're hoping to get back into in-person soon, but we'll just have to see how it goes.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.